Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Manufacturing Talks. I'm Jim Vinosky. And today I'm joined by Jeannine Kunz. She is the Chief Development Officer at SME, which was formerly the Society of Manufacturing Engineers. They've broadened their scope into everything manufacturing. And Jeannine is here to talk about things that SME is specifically doing to help industry tackle some of our most vexing problems. I'm guessing you can probably figure out what some of those are. She's going to dive into all of them here in just a few seconds. Stay tuned here on Manufacturing Talks.
Welcome to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vinosky. Industry has a million cool stories, and Jim talks to the movers and shakers who are making them happen. Let's dive in.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Manufacturing Talks. I'm Jim Vinosky, your host, and I'm really pleased today to be joined by Jeannine Kunz. She is the Chief Workforce Development Officer at SME, but there's bigger things coming, and we're going to talk about that. But before we do, Jeannine, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Nice to see you again.
It's great to see you again. We had a great conversation a couple of years ago, and yeah, it's good to reconnect, and I'm looking forward to talking because we've got new stuff to talk about. Things have gotten crazy. But until we get into that, let's first just hear a little bit about, where you came from, how you got doing what you're doing today.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting. I entered SME, believe it or not, gosh, I'm going on 25 years. It'll be 25 years this next summer. Entered the industry, not from manufacturing. Grew up in a home that had a mechanical engineer as a father, but really didn't know truly a lot about the industry. And when I entered, what may sound a little corny, I fell in love with the industry. I fell in love with what manufacturing represents for our country, from standard living, economic prosperity, national security, which we know is so important right now. Mm-hmm. And the work that SME does in this space as a nonprofit. So SME being an organization that's been around for almost 100 years and dedicated to the advancement of manufacturing through two key things: advancing technology, which we know manufacturing is technology rich, filled with new things that are always happening from the technology standpoint, as well as talent. So it's kind of tech and talent to us, those two things. And that really became an area, the talent side, workforce, became another strong passion for me, and how unlocking human potential to really empower manufacturing through adopting technology and advancing as an industry was that really cool mix of two things that I couldn't resist. And so here I am 25 years almost later.
Excellent. Well, and of course, number one, you're preaching to the choir here as far as loving manufacturing. And then number two, yeah, you hit on some really critical things that are, they've always been a big part of what we do, but as we're going to talk about, getting bigger and bigger by the day, it seems almost.
Yeah.
But before we get into the nuts and bolts, there's another bit of news that I just became aware of a couple of days before you got on here, and that is that you're moving up a notch. So you're taking over, in the new year as CEO of SME?
Yeah. So we have our current CEO is doing the great thing in life and gets the opportunity to retire, right? So he is moving on at the end of this year. And so the position of CEO opened up at SME. And as I mentioned, after 24 years and doing quite a bit of different things over those years for the SME organization, decided to put my name in that process and went through the search is with the committee that was doing that, which is a subset of our board of directors. And I have been announced now as our incoming CEO starting January 1, 2025, which is absolutely such an honor for someone who came into the industry. What I also love about it from a talent standpoint, because this is what we do, is help organizations understand the power of their talent, their current talent, and how to upskill your talent, grow your talent, invest in your talent. And I think it does, a lot for our staff in the organization to see someone who can come up through the organization and eventually become our CEO. And so it's an honor to have that opportunity and privilege on behalf of the good work that's happened in our almost 100-year history to be the person who actually starts to take us into our next 100 years.
Mhm.
And so it's with great excitement and also commitment and recommitment of SME to this industry, as you pointed out, Jim, that has so much opportunity, yet a lot of challenges to overcome to really harness that opportunity. And so I certainly look forward to working with our team and our board and our members and people like yourself and all of our partners to really see what we can do together
Yeah.
through unprecedented collaboration to go tackle some major national imperatives.
Yeah. Wonderful. Well, and so congratulations, first of all. Yeah,
Thank you.
kind of, obviously I talk to a lot of people across industry, and pretty universal feeling is, yeah, this is a good move. So you have lots of backers as you go into the new role. Do you have any first thoughts as you look at stepping into the role in the new year, as far as like what you're going to focus on out of the gates?
Yeah, so we've been really kind of tripling down on workforce. And I mentioned technology and talent are two key drivers of what SME focuses on to deliver on our mission to advance the industry. And they're both critically important, but they're also very interdependent. And you and I think when we
Sure.
last talked, we were talking a lot about the digitalization and the digital era and smart manufacturing. And as we shepherd, I think we were actually at the Rapid event, I think, when we
Right.
talked. So we were at an additive manufacturing kind of sometimes people feel like it's new, but it's been around. Actually, SME helped shepherd it 40 years ago.
Yep.
So a really good example of how SME can help shepherd and try to commercialize new technology into the industry, and kind of coming back to our, more recent conversations around smart and digitalization. This idea of talent, though, keeps coming to surface. It keeps coming to surface that it's really impeding our ability to adopt technologies and move forward on that axis of what we see kind of technology and talent going together. And so as we look at coming into my role into 2025, is creating an even stronger link between those, that you can't kind of go off in a corner and talk just about technology adoption or talent and how they come together.
Yep.
And so that's one of the key areas, is really taking the good work that we've been doing through workforce, but really making a stronger intentional connection into technology advancement. One good example, if I were to use that, Jim, I think you and I might have even briefly talked about this with, it was called the Smart Manufacturing Executive Council, that SME in partnership with SESME, the Smart Manufacturing Innovation Institute, which is supported by the Department of Energy. SME and SESME came together, myself and their CEO, John Dyke, who's a wonderful man if you've never met him, and trying to embody the idea of bringing together, I think we have about 25 executives across various industries that really are coming together and harnessing their intelligence and their interest in moving the industry as a whole forward, in the entire supply chain and the entire education system. And there's all those things that go along with it. And I'll set those aside for the moment, because these are really brilliant people around what needs to happen in terms of, the connected supply chain and digitalization and smart manufacturing. Yet one of the key things at the top of almost their list has come back to talent, leadership, culture, and how those are absolute critical pillars to doing what's needed if we're going to really kind of digitize our factories, connect the supply chain. And so that is something that we will continue to kind of really connect those two, technology and talent, together. That would be one of them. And then the other one is really around the pipeline of talent. So while we say workforce development, I think there's nobody who doesn't agree that we need to go younger. I mean, everyone's like, we need to go down to, the 2-year-old. No, I'm joking. But, certainly, though, we need to touch base in our elementary schools and our middle schools relative to the age groups that we're dealing with, right? So that is something that SME has been spending quite a bit of time, is to lower. We've been mostly in the high schools and above. We are looking down into below that. So those are a couple examples, but many more to come, I'm sure, as I jump into the new role.
Yep. So, yeah, the whole workforce challenge is obviously at front of everyone's minds in manufacturing. And the way I characterize it is it's kind of a triple whammy. We've got the baby boomers, the biggest generation ever, who are now retiring in droves, taking their decades of knowledge and experience with them. We don't have the numbers, just sheer numbers, to replace them, which is its own challenge. But then too, they were the last generation that had manufacturing careers and skilled trades held out as
Mhm.
really desirable career paths.
Yeah.
And so you hit on a few things that are going after that. Can you talk a little more about SME and those particular challenges, how you're focused on that?
Yeah, we focus on it in two key ways. There's the pipeline in general, as you just said, right? We kind of have this contraction of labor issues, right?
Yep.
From the baby boomers leaving, you mentioned. We also have, I want to add to that pressure, because as if there's not enough, right? There's not enough people, baby boomers are leaving. Some of the other pressures that are in that are all the other industries that need people too, right? So manufacturing sometimes like looks at themselves as an isolated bucket,
Right.
but having the privilege of doing this for quite some time, as I mentioned earlier, I get to kind of see the trend lines. But I think all of us as Americans, we can think about, you sit on hold a lot longer for, some service where they say, bear with us, we're short on staff.
Mm-hmm.
I, for the first time, a year ago, my daughter was in middle school, got the little notice that the bus isn't coming because we're shortage, on drivers, or went to the
Yep.
restaurant. There was a sign up that just said, we'll be back at like noon, and so I think that component of where we have a contraction everywhere and everyone needs kind of talent, from the service side to manufacturing to healthcare to IT, et cetera. And I'm going to throw in there another new demand that's new, call it certainly from 10 some years ago, is this gig economy.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about a complete new industry, if you will, that plays right into some of the changing landscape of how workers view work.
Yep.
And so this gig economy, right, creates flexibility, creates agility, sometimes doesn't require as much education, training, and the like. And so you can get somebody who is maybe a single mom who says, I will be able to just go maybe do Uber Eats driving, or I can maybe even become an influencer and be on, communicating out to individuals, certain product sales that I can gain dollars and income that way. And some people are really successful doing these things. And so I bring that up as just a completely different landscape of what's happening when you think of a manufacturer who's competing for talent against other industries like a healthcare, and another industry that nobody necessarily thinks about that's a growing industry, quote, the gig economy. It's no longer just doing a gig at the local bar, that's where the term came from, right? You got a gig tonight. A gig economy is huge now. And it also plays into what the talent's looking for in terms of that flexibility, which manufacturers are really more challenged with when you think of what they're dealing with in terms of, I need you in a manufacturing plant, let's say, and I need you to be here. You don't have that kind of flexibility. So that's one of the elements. And then also adding to it would be within manufacturing, you've got things like the Inflation Reduction Act, investment, and the big one being the CHIPS and Science Act. So these big federal agencies that have great initiatives that are important to our economy, but put added pressures on the system that we just talked about. So SME's approach to trying to address pipeline with all those contracting issues that we're dealing with is one particular program inside the high schools is called PRIME, Partnership Response in Manufacturing Education. And what it is, Jim, is it's going inside of the high schools across the United States that to understand in that region, what are the new skills or existing skills that are needed in demand for jobs. And then going backwards, engaging the manufacturers, engaging the employers in the community, working back with the high school to then place the right equipment, teacher training, curriculum, scholarship dollars, basically a very comprehensive program to equip a career and technical education pathway for students to come out and gain jobs that are in need in their marketplace and in their region. And the employers win because they're kind of helping dictate the specifications. The students win because there's jobs waiting for them. And the education system wins because we're actually able to bolster up and invest in their school with some of these outside funds that we bring either from other foundations, state government, federal government, which really creates somewhat of a pipeline. So I'll stop there because there's a lot more, but that program is a really good example where we were just announced through some White House initiatives with the Department of Energy and Argonne National Labs. How can we take that prime program that's already an existing infrastructure, and they wanted to see, could we create a battery manufacturing pathway? Because we know that the battery manufacturing electrification is a growing need in the United States and in certain targeted regions. So it's a good example where those federal agency investments, challenges in pipeline, how do you create a solution that is an engagement of industry, academia, government, but boots on the ground, go make it happen is kind of what S likes to go do.
Yeah. One thing I've maintained, and I keep banging the drum about, is that companies, plants themselves have to be engaged in this work now, because we've basically created this gap that we're having to fill, kind of building the bridge as we cross it, if you will. Are you seeing much more uptake as far as that engagement from companies and individual facilities in connecting and working with, for example, you guys in the schools and the different outfits that are helping address that gap?
Yeah, and Jim, that's a great question, and I have a positive answer. Is the answer is
Good.
yes. And again, that back to that trend lines of doing this for 20 some years. There was a time that the manufacturer maybe felt more of, I'm going to communicate the problem, right, and hope someone goes and fixes it.
Yep.
Not an unfair maybe request, but one that wasn't moving the needle as much as it could by jumping into the situation a little bit more. And sometimes the line I would use is, maybe I'm a little biased, you do supply chain management and manufacturing all the time. Supply chain is important and critical, but often it's thought of as supply chain of components, parts, and materials. But supply chain of your people is the number one supply chain that you currently actually own. And so you wouldn't leave it without clear specifications to other suppliers. Or if there was a quality issue with a supplier, you certainly would go and dive in, support your supplier, and do the good work as a good steward of that supply chain management. So the same is what we certainly encourage employers to do. More could do it, but we've seen a very good uptick in that engagement, as you've defined, sometimes with those prime schools, sometimes sitting on advisors, providing co-ops, internships, engagement, going to workshops, all the good things. But in addition, what we've actually seen in some cases is those employers that really have massive needs, that are recognizing thousands of workers are needed to do something in a certain region. Maybe they opened up a plant. We have some really good examples where those employers have gone in and done a tremendous amount of work, hired people specifically for the role of like a workforce development. They're out meeting with all the right community people and understanding what's happening and partnering with them in a much more collaborative way. And that's significant because it gives that intel to those organizations. And there's many of them like SME and others that stand ready to try to do the good work, but they do need, as you mentioned, someone to be there to help create that clearer lines of what's needed to make sure that the work is done in a way that is supportive of the employers. The only shout out I would give here in this one is if I flip that storyline and say, one of the things I try to say to people like ourselves that are in the middle of that pool trying to do good work for our employers in our corporate America is it's a confusing little world, right? So when you do decide to come out as a company, I think the work upon us, and this is really what we try to do a lot of, is we've got to make it easier to work within that system, because it becomes a scary place and it's easy to go retract back into your four walls of your employer. and say, gosh, I can't figure that all out. And so it puts a big onus on the education system, nonprofits, government, to try to make this a little bit less chaotic of a space.
Hmm.
Good intent, but sometimes can be chaotic.
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, to some degree, we're all feeling our way in this new environment, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Uh, let's get back for a minute to the smart manufacturing piece, because the other thing that I talk about is there's a part of this problem that isn't going to get fixed the old way, and that is just the sheer numbers thing. You're not going to have the people to do a brute force manufacturing economy like we had,
yeah,
pre-World War II or whenever.
yeah,
And so a piece of it is definitely going to be more automation and higher level jobs for the people who are on the floors of the factories. Now, you talked about the Smart Manufacturing Executive Council that you were part of. Specifically around addressing that workforce challenge, what are the things that manufacturers ought to know and be preparing for in that regard?
yeah. And I think, maybe one data point with Bureau of Labor Statistics, if you've seen this, I think that really amplifies what you talked about, is for the first time, kind of, I think, in history, the flattening of a productivity per manufacturing worker.
Right.
And one might say, well, why is that? To some extent, I think it almost, these are all speculations, but one might say, where you kind of went with it, there's only so much an individual can do, right? So we've all lived, you and I have probably been in our career long enough to say we've lived the additional scaling of the work, the sheer amount of
Yeah.
work that we do as being as productive as we can possibly get at some point. So you kind of hit a diminishing returns on the human capital that we have. And so I think that's where you start to see those productivity gains start to wane down,
Yeah.
because you and I can now only give so much. We might be able to say 20 years ago, I'm more productive because just sheer amount of stuff that goes on, technology tools, but eventually it hits a cap, right? We can only do so
Mhm.
much. So I think that infusion of just, we can't get any more productivity out of the human capital we have, drives this need, as you said. One, there's no more coming in, and we just can't squeeze any more out of Jeannine or Jim. And so this idea of technology, I think, is important to for a company. What we try to say is not have people feel like it's going to replace them, but human
Mhm.
in the loop of technology. And that's an important, comes back to, I think, a comment I made earlier with the Smart Manufacturing Executive Council that they really honed in on, which is leadership and culture and transformation, and not underestimating the time and intensity of thoughtfulness around people as part of that journey when you are adopting technology.
Yeah.
And that it's not one or the other. It doesn't replace jobs in the sense of your job might change or this job might go away, but it created this other new job. And that takes
Right.
a lot of good leadership, communication, and thoughtfulness, as I mentioned, to your
Yep.
workforce, to bring out the idea of being open to change. And also then I think the flip side is just organizations really starting to look at, what does that mean? What kind of skills do I need? What
Right.
kind of talent, what change? I mean, you and I both know data scientists, data analytics, everything around data has obviously become very, very critical. AI, how does that affect now all this data, and how do you use it? So those are some of the things from, again, a human capital standpoint that we really try to emphasize.
Yeah. And I'm really glad you mentioned that concept of you're not necessarily replacing the people. The people's jobs could change because of the addition of technology. And I've seen that out on factory floors for myself. Now, that being said, are there particular areas that companies should be focused on when it comes to preparing for that upskilling of their existing workforce?
Yeah, I think we have said, at least we try to say, in terms of being prepared. Unfortunately, not all organizations are, and I kind of alluded to this earlier. In manufacturing, we love our technology. We love our process management, process improvements, and quality. And those are all, but
Yep.
the KPIs that most manufacturers are measured on are related to productivity, sustainability, throughput, uptime, customer demand, all those safety. I mean, all good, important KPIs. But the thing I would say that probably concerns me the most when I think about waves of technology coming in is if you have a poor infrastructure on talent management, it's very difficult to go from a lack of structure and really starting to harness change at this
Mhm.
higher level that we're talking about. When you see organizations that haven't maybe looked at their job descriptions for current roles in decades, or they don't have onboarding programs, they don't have, I'll call it what we would consider very fundamental components of a good talent management system, human capital management. So the simplest answer to your question would to say, very first and foremost, make sure talent management is part of your key KPIs, strategies, one of the key pillars. And Nestle, one of our partners on the Smart Manufacturing Executive Council, did such a nice job showing how people-centric leadership, people-centric deployments of technology was very important to their organization. And what we have seen, those organizations that really embody that at the early stages of a technology transformation and ensure they have those underpinnings before they embark on even worrying about all the new skills and all the things that are normal when you take on new technology, are the ones that tend to fare it out the best because they just have a
Mhm.
culture. So I almost say to people, even if you haven't started on a technology transformation, just start building the good old, what makes a high impact learning organization strong, and start to build
Mhm.
those disciplines in. And the easiest way to do that is make sure it's part of your high level strategic plan or KPIs. Otherwise,
Yeah.
if it's not, you and I both know it doesn't get the attention it needs.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, there are still plenty of companies out there that are really behind in just the basics of technology. I think about even off the floor stuff, business process, automation, that kind of thing. I've also been kind of hitting on that as that could potentially be a company's biggest bang for the buck right now is not replacing something on the floor, but just adding, a better ERP or a better
Yes.
CMMS, something like that. That
Yeah.
could get them along on what you're talking about around building that structure.
Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes I've heard people say who are much smarter than me on the technology side is some organizations that never really kind of came into the third, fourth, revolution, they kind of almost go faster because they don't have to unbody or, rewind a lot of the infrastructure of different
Yeah.
isolated systems that they
Yep.
can connect systems faster if they don't have. And so I thought that's an interesting way of looking at it, I guess. But as you said, there's still many organizations. There's just a lot for us to tackle, I think, as manufacturers and organizations like ourselves and you who are trying to support this industry and its evolution. But you, I think, mentioned a really good example.
Yep. Well, and I think a lot of people are missing that there are bolt-on kind of bespoke solutions that didn't exist even 5 years ago, where even if you've got an ERP right now, if you've got a piece of it that isn't really working for you, there's a company out there that has a better solution that will integrate with your existing ERP. And
Yes,
that's
yeah.
every bit as much a technical advance as getting that shiny new piece of operating equipment.
Exactly. Just optimizing, kind of taking technology and optimizing, you hear people talk about putting a sensor on a
Yep.
machine just to kind of run for predictive maintenance or just capturing data on that. So you have better optics and transparency and what's going on. So as you said, there's almost bolt-ons to existing technology. And that's a really good point though you bring up, because sometimes we can talk about we do this with learning too, is sometimes it can be daunting, right? And
Yeah,
we'll just
for
start with a
sure.
piece, just take a step, right? And same, I think, goes with from a technology transformation. When people hear digital factories, you kind of can go to the big vision and kind of get pretty. You break. All right, I'm going to go back to what I was doing earlier.
Right. Yep,
It can be daunting. It can be,
for sure.
because we say the same. Workforce is not for the faint of heart. It is complex. There's
Yep.
a lot to it, but not doing something is also not a good strategy. So just start taking steps. And that's a little bit like what you're saying is
Yep.
there's really economical ways. And then also the nice thing about what you talked about in that example is allows people to kind of test how the culture, how does things react? Do people look at this and go, wow, look at the power of the data we have on this. And now I could
Mhm.
think about a new idea. Hey, Jim, boss, can we do XYZ? Can we get that kind of, now that made me think of how we could, run that machine over there differently, And that's when you know you're kind of culturally ready, at least, or at
Right.
least have a cell or a certain plant that's ready, maybe over another one, which does create that buzz. Is
Yep.
you create that lighthouse maybe within one plant, and you could transfer it to another one.
Yeah, I love that, as a measure of readiness and success is how engaged your floor employees are in those improvements and giving those ideas.
Yeah. And probably from, somebody who's been around for a long time, lean and operational excellence, they always say the human side of lean was one of the most powerful components. And do you create
Yep.
that safe zone for someone to maybe talk themselves out of a job, right? By
Right,
improving a
right.
process. And I was in a meeting yesterday where someone said, well, you know, maybe I'm talking myself out of a job. And I thought, one of the best comments I could think of was that person felt safe to do it, confident enough in their abilities to do something else for our organization. That was an
Right.
SME employee. And I thought, that's a good sign when someone could say that.
Yep.
And as you know, those Toyota with lean always talked about that space of being not fearing
Yep.
failure, and that see failure, quote, as an opportunity for learning.
Yep. For sure. Okay, as you look at, stepping into your new leadership role and think about like the next 5 to 10 years, what do you see on the horizon as those next big focus areas for SME?
Yeah, I would say some of the focus areas that we have in terms of workforce is not going to go away.
Right.
We clearly have seen that that's not going to go away. And one of the things we're doing in that space, and I'll talk about another, is um, we were always really strong at developing and figuring out what the new skills were needed, what was happening with electrification or semiconductors, and what training did we need. And that really was all about developing someone and
Mhm.
giving them skills. And we've determined we really needed to brand that out back to attract and retain, because we saw that those two aspects, companies were saying, that's great, but I don't have the people. And that's what you touched on, Jim. I don't have the
Yep.
people to train. So Jeannine, that's wonderful. That's great stuff. I love what you're doing. And so for us, as we go out 5 to 10 years, is really anchoring ourselves around a much fuller view, strategy, and support to the industry and our partners on everything from attracting, developing, and retaining. And that's not just through SME, that's through, many organizations that do a really good job at that.
Yep.
That would be important for us. And then on the flip side, really working with talent from all different aspects. And I know you did one of your talks I saw was on, working with those that were maybe formerly incarcerated or second
Mhm.
chance citizens. And that's a whole different way of how do you look at, one of our goals is to make sure that our workforce in manufacturing is reflective of our nation's people. So while you can do the things to support the employers, and that's all important, how do we unlock human potential in our country at all levels? And that is, we know, requires a lot of rethinking in all aspects of everything we do. And so certainly SME is diving into that as we go into the 5 to 10 years. Would love to see that our workforce starts to reflect more of our nation's people, everything from women, from minorities, from various individuals that are underrepresented, historically resilient populations, our veterans, our, second chance citizens and the like. And then on the technology side is really keeping a sharp eye on things like the semiconductors, and even additive manufacturing. Even though it's been around 40 years, there's still a lot of elements that are impeding its acceleration from
Right.
standards, from materials and other things. And probably one of the big ones, though, comes back to what I know you and I have talked about before, is really looking at how we digitize things more. And it's funny to me that as much as manufacturing is all about technology, I mean, we geek out on it in manufacturing.
Mhm.
But yet there's still, and you kind of touched on it, there's still so much more we can be
Yep.
utilizing. That how can SME take what it sees across groups like the Smart Manufacturing Executive Council, and SME sits in a unique position to kind of raise those up at the federal level, to kind of be a voice on behalf of the industry, with partners like SESME. And so to hopefully affect legislation, policy, and funding, as well as best practices. So the line that we like to say is think nationally and kind of act and integrate locally, but also when you see something locally, how do you scale it nationally? And SME sits in this unique position of being a national nonprofit that can help do those kinds of things. So and there's other organizations. So if we can do that, I think we can accelerate some of the good things that happen in pockets of communities that the rest of the country could benefit from.
All right. Good. Is there anything we haven't touched on that folks ought to know?
No, not that I can think of, other than that I'd only say that work like yourself and what you do, and the opportunity that I got to meet you, a couple years back. The more we can get messages out through you taking time like you're doing now to kind of share it for some people who maybe it's new to, or maybe they're doing some really great work and they can learn, right? And say, maybe it's the SME, we could partner. You're getting that message out, which I want to thank you for. And I know certainly in talking to you how passionate you are. So we just appreciate all the work of everyone in our industry that, as you said earlier, the thing that made me fall in love with it is how people come from all different, doesn't matter, right? Different domains, different backgrounds.
Yep.
And the one thing that seems to really never be a problem is how to rally around moving this industry forward. And that's what certainly I'm most excited about coming into my job and working with people like yourself and others. So thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. And thank you. I appreciate you coming on and sharing your thoughts as you get ready to take over the reins. And we'll be following closely to see how you make your mark on SME. So,
well, thanks, Jim. I look forward to talking again soon. Good luck with all your work too.
Okay. Thank you. And as always, thanks to you in the audience. You are why we're here. We're here every Tuesday and now oftentimes Thursday as well. So tune back in. We'll have new shows. Jeannine just brought us like the broad scope of everything important in manufacturing today. I can't promise everyone's going to have the command of the world that she does, but everyone we have here is expert in his or her own way. So tune back in. We'll have good stuff for you. So with that being said, this is Jim Vinosky from Manufacturing Talks with Jeannine Kunz. Thank you. Signing off. So long.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Manufacturing Talks with Jim Vinosky. Watch for new episodes dropping every Tuesday. And don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe.